there, fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
And I'm Shireen.
And welcome to the month of October, everyone.
October.
The best month of the year, as far as I'm concerned.
Spooky season.
Yes. The month of the year where everyone suddenly is like, I love spooky stuff. When for the rest of the year, all of you just disappear, vanish into the ether, and the rest of us who are spooky all year is sitting here like, oh.
My whole decor is spooky in my library all year long.
That's true. Yeah, I don't change anything, really. I think there are like a few additions. I don't know if anybody else does this, but there are like additions that I make of like extra Halloween specific stuff at this time of year, but I don't. There's so much stuff that just stays all year that's like could be considered Halloween decor that I'm like, no, that's just my stuff.
No, it's cool.
Yeah.
That's my stuff. I have this discussion with my mother every year.
Where she's like, why don't you put all of this away?
Yeah, she's like, so are you going to put all this away? No.
It's not Halloween stuff, Mom. It's just my stuff. It's just my decor. This is my aesthetic, and this is the room. Both of us, I've noticed both of us have done this now. Both of us have sort of determined at each of our individual places a room where the spooky stuff goes. Yes. Where you're like, it's contained, okay, because I don't want to bother my fiance with it all year. I'm like, fine, I'll put it in one fucking room, but the whole place could look like this.
Oh, definitely. Like, I'm slowly trying to move some into like the other rooms. It's the constant battle of Scully in the bathroom. I got a big skull.
Oh, your big skull thing.
Yeah. I want to keep it there all year round. He wears a Santa hat during the holiday season.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all.
No, do I.
Yeah, your mom is very upset about things like this. She hates Halloween.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't help.
She does not love that at all. She's always like very turned off by the whole thing. And meanwhile, we're excited about it. So we're really happy that we're here. We're really happy that it's a new month and that it's just the most wonderful time of the year. It's not December.
This is Halloween.
There you go. The whole beginning half of that movie. Ignore the Christmas stuff.
Yeah, totally.
So obviously for the month of October, we wanted to do something spooky and fun and not, I guess, super general, because there's like a lot you can talk about, but it's really hard sometimes to like, it's almost harder to come up with topics, I find, when we don't have a specific theme.
It's true. Yep.
Than when we do. So what we decided to do for the month of October is talk about Gothic fiction, which, like, if you know anything about it, Gothic fiction honestly falls very, very well into this whole time of year. Everything is very gray and blue toned.
And black.
Everything is very haunted, and that's fine. And everyone's just okay with it at this time of year. So we figured, why not be okay with it, even though, like, I'm okay with it all year. But,
absolutely.
You know, I don't have kids. If I were moving somewhere and somebody was like, this is haunted, I'd be like, okay.
Yay,
I hope they're friendly.
Casper.
And then that would be really fun.
Yeah.
So to kick things off for the month of October, and to kick things off for Gothic month, or Gothic literature month over here at Fully Booked, we decided to talk about the adaptation of Susan Hill's novel, The Woman in Black.
I can't leave yet. You should have left. You should have gone when we told you to.
You said you have a son. Go home to him.
Her novel was originally released in 1983, which I always associated, because it's period piece, I always associate it as being something older. Like, I always assume that the novel, no, it's 1983.
Wow.
It's the year that the novel was originally
I always assume
released.
like Gothic fiction comes out in like, when was the Gothic period? Like, what, 17, 18? No,
I think later.
19.
I'd say late 1800s through the like maybe mid 1910s or so.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm thinking Northanger Abbey.
Yeah, like those types of time, and like a little after that when you got into the more sort of speculative fiction,
metaphysical,
written by a lot of women, also more than people are aware of anyway. Yep. So that's what we're talking about this week, is The Woman in Black. Like I said, it was released in 2012, starring Daniel Radcliffe.
Harry Potter.
It's still in his very much in his Harry Potter time in his life, I would say,
because it was only a couple of years later.
I think it was like almost around the time that maybe like the final films were coming out. It must have been, I don't know, I haven't checked in a while, but probably around that time. And you can kind of tell, so this is like a weird thing, and this is like a weird side note that I have, but Daniel Radcliffe is one of those people who, like, I know that a lot of people critiqued his portrayal of Harry Potter, and there are parts of me that can understand that, because he went through this period in these movies where, like, he was very sort of, like, his expressions didn't change very much, like, his facial expressions didn't change very much, and he tended to be very stiff in a lot of what he was doing. Since he's finished Harry Potter, and I don't know, maybe been able to get away from like this massive fucking franchise that he was stuck with for like 11 or 12 years. He's a phenomenal actor. Everything that I've seen him in since then, I adore. I love.
You could make that comment about like Robert Pattinson,
about child actors in
Kristen
general.
Stewart, you know, what's her name? Hermione.
Emma Watson.
Yeah. Like, you know, a lot of these actors who were part of these massive franchises with this pressure to deliver on characters that they would have never achieved perfection regardless of what they did, because everybody had a different interpretation of what those characters would be like.
Think about trying to act in a franchise this big when you're like 12 years old. Just think about that yourself as well. Like the pressure that's there. And I think that he's come through it better, really, more than anything else. And I love him and everything that he's in now. I think he's great, and he seems like a really good human. So
he does seem like a good human.
Love that.
Yeah.
So at the time that we're recording this, The Woman in Black currently has a rating of 6.4 out of 10 on IMDb and 66% on Rotten Tomatoes, which, like,
yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair.
This is like, okay, this movie to me feels very, very 2010s in its portrayal and stylization of the horror. It relies on all the jump scares and all the music cues that go along with those jump scares that you're like, I mean, okay, sure.
Like, they must have done about 10 crow jump scares in this movie.
Yeah, the crow jump scares, the woman in the window in the house and everything like that. Like, there are just, it's one of those, it very much is of its time. Yeah. You don't like think about it. I didn't think about it at all because I hadn't watched this, I think probably since maybe like a year or two after it had originally come out. And I didn't think about it until maybe a half hour into the movie. I started like, you know, like being like, wow, this is very much a movie that was released in 2012, and you can just feel it based on just how they're not like they've taken the set and made it very much like a period piece, but nothing else is a period piece of it. The people don't really look like they fit the costumes that well.
No, they don't.
Like they're like they tried like to the bare minimum.
Well, it's almost like a play, right? Like when you watch a play and like obviously the actors don't always look like they belong, and you're like, okay, it's a play, you know, like they're in front of me, like I gotta like abandon my.
And we've talked about this before, and just the fact that it's easier when you're watching a stage production, I find, to kind of distance yourself from that sensibility. But when you're watching a movie, it's harder because you're watching the one action on screen the entire time, so it's less immersive and you're just more likely to notice or pick up on these things. And I find that that's the case. Yeah, that's the case with this film and with a lot of films around this time. Anything that was being released within this period, mostly anyway, within this period of like 4 or 5 years in like the beginning of the 2010s, even mid 2000s, I would say, through like maybe 2005 to 2015. Everything that was like a period piece was really only a period piece in terms of decor.
Yeah, they used a lot of fog machines.
And set design, that's it, and things like that. And those are where like those, like, thank God that those teams existed and that they did such a wonderful job with what they were doing in those films, because the rest of it just feels like it falls flat a lot of the time.
Well, that was kind of what I felt with this movie. Like, I know that it was meant to be, you know, Gothic era, Gothic fiction, you know, and it just didn't feel like it hit the mark, because whenever I watch, you know, Gothic or I read Gothic, there's something very mysterious going on as well.
And it was definitely missing the mystery.
There was no mystery. Everything was really obvious of what was happening.
That also,
you know?
But I feel like that's also indicative of the 2010s. There was something there where we liked to be very obvious. There was no subtextual anything, particularly in mainstream films that were being released, in mainstream genre films like horror films, science fiction, things like that were being released at that time. It was, here, let me walk you through every little bitty bit of plot point. Nothing is open for interpretation. There's no open-endedness to the story where like you can decide what's actually happened. No. It's right there. Here it is. Here's the story. There's nothing to interpret. There's nothing to make you think about at all.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Like, totally agree with you. And that's how I felt watching this movie. Like, the first scene, so I didn't remember what this movie was. I put it on. My husband was like, oh, no, not this. And he just walked out the the room, and I was like, what? Like, normally he's down for this kind of movie, and I was like, what? And like, it's boring. The first scene was interesting. Like, I was like, okay, like, I'm interested.
And like, it's dark.
It's dark, but I'm like, okay, like, I want to know what's going to happen in this movie, because I couldn't remember that I had seen it.
But that was kind of, but that's kind of, it's true that like, the cold open of the film kind of draws you in, but then after that, things kind of start to peter out a little bit.
Oh, okay, I don't care about
never
this
mind.
now.
Yeah, so it's like, I think it's 1889, 3 little girls
having
in this massive house are having a little tea party. They're playing. They hear something that only they seem to be able to hear, or they're like summoned by something. The 3 of them, they must be like 6 or 7. They walk to the windows and proceed to trigger warning, throw themselves out the throw themselves out of the window and die.
Screaming.
You hear the mom screaming and being like, "My baby!" And then title card, and then you get into the meat of it a little bit. So Daniel Radcliffe plays a character named Arthur Kipps. Arthur Kipps or Arthur Kipp? No, Kipps. Sorry. Yeah.
See, it was that boring that we didn't even pay attention.
He is a young lawyer who lives in London, which again, very realistic, because he's called basically with his firm. So his wife passed away about 4 years ago during childbirth. He has a young son named Joseph, and he is, trying to make ends meet for them, but he's obviously struggled greatly since his wife passed away, which is really unfortunate. And he's been given an assignment to go out to a very small village named Crythin Gifford, which is a really strange name for a town. Crythin Gifford. I'm not lisping there. That's actually what it's called. There's a TH in there. So he's been given an assignment to go out there because he needs to go to this really massive estate called Eel Marsh House, because the widow who was living there named Alice, she passed away recently, and he needs to go collect any additional documents, get all of the paperwork together so that her estate can be properly taken care of, divided up, whatever needs to be done with it. So he's given, it's very isolated, but he's given kind of instruction to go and take care of this. So he takes off from London. Again, all of that makes sense, because when you kind of see, like, in Crythin Gifford itself and in the village, you've got like all the people who are working folk who are in these tiny little like apartments and stuff like that in town. And it's always that's always what it's like. The metropolis is where people go during like the year and stuff for like work, or during certain times of the year for work and everything. But the rich folk have these massive estates.
Well, that's what happened during the plague, right?
Yeah.
Like in the
So they all fled from the cities, and then that kind of continued to be a thing. Where do you think the ideas of like summer houses come from and stuff? People take off and they would take off and they would leave the city for a period of time, except the people who can't do that are people like Arthur, who are working people who work all year long. They don't have the kind of funds that you need for something like that. So he's taken off, he gets there, and basically he is looking for a man named Jerome, who is, I believe a lawyer. Is Jerome supposed to be a lawyer as well? I think so. Or he was in charge of the estate for Eel Marsh House. Anyway, he arrives there, and he's
like
told,
the executor of the will.
Yeah, that's it. And he's told by Jerome and his wife, like, no, you don't need to be here. It's fine. Everything's like being taken care of. Whatever. I'm going to send you right back to London. And he's like, okay, no. He's like, guys, like, I just got here. I need to go to the house. I need to see what other documents there could be. Like, not everything's in order, and I need to do my job properly. So he's basically being stopped by everybody at every turn, kind of, where everybody's like, oh no, don't go to the house, don't go to the house, don't go to the house. And the only person who is helpful in any way, shape, or form is this man named Samuel Daly, who he meets on the train on the way from London out to the area, out to Crythin Gifford in the first place, who's a, I guess, wealthy landowner in that area, because he's got this big-ass house, who's the only person who's kind of, like, nice to him and sort of normal. Everybody in this small town is very paranoid.
But, like, this is the thing, right? Like, I found that in this, none of the characters were very memorable at all. And they're also very inconsequential to the story for the most part.
It's just things to kind of vaguely help him. And that, like, includes Arthur himself, honestly.
Exactly. Like, it's just to move the story along.
It's just to move the story along.
And, like, like, even the mystery, and I'm using air quotes here, is not mysterious at all. Like, it's like, oh, everybody's paranoid. There's, like, something going on. But even they don't know what's going on. Like, there's no concrete, like, prove until
they just have
Arthur starts experiencing it.
And he's the one who kind of figures out like what's going on, which yes, again, he's the main character, so it makes sense, but it's true. So he does get passage out to Eel Marsh House, which is it's in the middle of like, it's basically in the middle of, I don't know what it, like a marsh I guess, and a marsh in which like the tide comes in and out, so the one road that exists to get there is literally flooded for a portion of the day while the tide is in, and then you have to wait till the tide goes out to leave. Which, like, all of that stuff and the house itself, creepy, cool, awesome. But there's so much atmosphere missing from this film that I was like, a Gothic atmosphere is spooky. Like, legitimately, like, tension is built, and you are uncomfortable when you're reading a story like this, when you're watching a better made film like this, that's like giving you a good idea. But that's just, I don't know, I just find that's kind of, when they're well done, it really creates like a really good amount of atmosphere for you as a reader or as a viewer. But in something like this film, they rely so much on like, oh, but there are noises coming from another room, because that's pretty much all that happens to him while he's there. There are noises from somewhere. And then he goes outside and he sees that there's like someone in the window there. And the first thing that he really sees that he gets, I guess, a good look at is this woman in like a big black dress and a big black veil standing like in the back of the house. There's like a cemetery back there, with several gravestones, and she's just standing there, and he sees her, and then she walks away, and you're like, okay, sure. There's always a creepy house and a creepy ghost woman living in that fucking house. Because if it's not that, then how is it
Then what is it?
This is a totally different kind of story. This is a totally different genre. Why are we talking about it? No, it's true. But like, I would say like 80% of the time in Gothic, like that's what you're getting. Like, this house is haunted. And it's haunted by a really mean old lady.
Yeah, and like people are like, in some cases when it gets kind of pushed a little bit, like everybody's inexplicably like unhinged. Yeah. And like we'll see that in our next episode about our next movie. But Anyway.
Yeah, we'll see that a little later in the month for sure. So when he kind of has seen all of this stuff, he's like, okay, so this is, what the fuck is going on? Like, why am I seeing, like, there are people in the house, but there shouldn't be people in the house. So he goes back into town and he goes to speak to the police about it. The cop's like, okay, no. Yeah. Because everybody just knows there are ghosties in the house, basically, in Eel Marsh House. So they're like, no, thank you. Yeah. This group of children that he had seen earlier come in, the little girl ingested lye for some reason. We don't know why, though. It's just because what we're given to understand after is that if anybody sees the woman in black, which is what they call her, at the house, bad things start to happen to the children in the town. And so this is something that seems to happen fairly regularly. Like, it will happen periodically throughout the years since this woman's death several decades ago, basically. So this seems to be something that does reoccur on a regular basis. So this little girl dies because she literally ate poison. Yeah. Okay. And then very confusingly, immediately the townspeople blame Arthur, which like, you're like, what? Like, the parents and stuff are like, this is your fault. And I'm like, what? He tried to save her.
But again, like, going back to like Gothic people being unhinged, like, this is just like not a linear unhinged, like it's just really random. And you're like, you're trying to move the story along, but it's not really moving along the way you want it to. No. It's just a bit disappointing,
Yeah. So he does wind up staying with Samuel and his wife Elizabeth. Elizabeth is also not mentally well. Their son, there's always a crazy woman as well, which I don't always appreciate about this. Anyway, whatever. Anyway, Elizabeth, unfortunately, and Samuel lost their son to drowning. I believe it was 6 years earlier or something, like a while back. I believe actually at the same time as those three girls killed themselves at the beginning. Which 1889, because then we jump forward by like several years. So yeah, it's something like that. She's weird. She's got 2 tiny dogs that she uses to replace her kid, I guess. And she seems to, again, it's very unclear. She seems to have visions of some sort where she says that their son tries to communicate with them, and she like tries to
yes,
draw
right.
with her knife on the table and stuff. But I don't know. You can't tell. You can't tell if she's really seeing this or if she's nuts. We don't know.
I mean, she does do a pretty convincing job.
She does.
I'm like, maybe the lady's actually talking to her son. Like, let her draw on the table.
It's possible because this is a story where like the haunting isn't fake. Like, there's legitimately someone there. So it's hard to say.
Right.
Anyway, Arthur is still trying to figure all of this out and figure out like what's happened there. And he finds like all these old he finds like old correspondences between Alice, the widow who passed away recently, and her sister Jeanette. And Jeanette is writing these letters to her saying, like, you've taken my son Nathaniel away from me. You've taken him away. You won't let me see him and everything. And because it's basically what it seems to have been is that Alice married Jeanette's husband after, I guess, Jeanette was considered, I guess she had like a mental breakdown or something, and she was considered like an unfit mother. So they got married and adopted Nathaniel officially themselves and would not let her see him. After which point there was also a death certificate that's discovered that indicates that Nathaniel unfortunately drowned in the marsh on the property.
Right. But they never found his body.
But they never recovered his body. When Arthur returns to Jerome's house to try and find more information about this, to get like a final kind of, I guess, story from someone, he goes into the basement, and for some fucking reason, again, it's the ghost thing. So I guess you can just explain everything away, but it's done in this really choppy, really strange way where he goes there, and Jerome and his wife's young daughter is in the basement, and she's like, go away, even though she's like locked in the bottom of the basement. And you're like, why is she there? How did she get there? We don't know.
Why is she locked down there?
So she tells him to go away, and he and Sam are like, okay, fine, let's try to go back to the house, but they can't because these guys like try to attack them, basically. Like some of the townspeople are like, oh, you're doing this, all of this is your fault. And then
they love their pitchforks in this one.
Oh my God, right.
Torches and
pitchforks. Like the young girl who had eaten poison earlier, who died, her father, again, blames Arthur for this. And I'm like, oh my God. So after he has found all of these correspondences at the house, he goes outside and he sees a bunch of dead kids. And you're like, okay.
Yeah, they keep coming back with the dead kids.
Yeah, and then we learn around this time as well, on top of the correspondences, so there were correspondences that indicated that Nathaniel was taken away from Jeanette. Alice and whatever Jeanette's husband's name was, married and officially adopted Nathaniel, wouldn't let her see him. He unfortunately, after that, died. He drowned on the marsh. And then Jeanette killed herself by hanging, which is something that you do see later. And then she said that's it, where she basically said, like, Alice, I will never forgive you and I'll always go after you, blah, 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 blah. And he also, and that's it. Arthur kind of runs outside. There's a bunch of, that's it.
Kids.
The little ghost kids running around. And then he sees, like, what it would have, I guess, looked like when Jeanette killed herself.
Right.
He goes back into town the next morning. And it turns out that, again, you're like, what? Jerome's house is on fire.
Yeah, got set on fire.
Is on fire, and he and his wife have been dragged outside, but of course their daughter is still inside, and Arthur's like, oh God. So he goes running inside to try to save her, goes down to the basement where he sees that the little girl, their daughter, with the woman in black who's standing there, who causes this little girl to light herself on fire, which she does, and then she dies.
Horrible.
You're like, Jesus fucking Christ.
There's always fires in these Gothic stories.
Oh, yeah, I know. There's a lot of stuff on fire. You gotta if you gotta get rid of the spooky Yuki house by the end of it, I guess setting it on fire is a good way to do that.
If you got a spooky Yuki, you gotta fire it.
Yeah, so this is where he kind of gets more clarity, even though I just gave it to people earlier when I was talking about this, but that, when he goes back outside, of course, and he's not been able to save her, the mother is fully distressed, of course, and she says, she's like, it's because you saw her. You saw the woman. When you see the woman, bad things happen, basically, and you're like, oh, okay, so this is what's going on now. Fine. Yep. And then it's Samuel's wife who informs Arthur that Jeanette is, in fact, the woman in black. She's the apparition that comes back periodically, and that seems to cause, basically because her child was taken from her, she's like, I'm going to take everyone else's children as, a form of revenge, which you're like, I don't think a mother would do that, but anyway.
But that, this comes up a lot, I think, in these, and then, Daniel Radcliffe's character is like, okay, well, you know what? If that's the case, then let's try and get her son back and give him to her.
Yes, because he's trying
his body was never found.
No, because he's trying to break the curse, right? So he and Samuel are like, okay, let's go back to the marsh. I'm going to jump in there and I will find the body and I will reunite her with her son. And like, you know, I will like, you know, go and put him in the same grave as her, basically where she's buried. And hopefully that will help her, and that will be the end of it, basically. When you, like, the logic tracks for me there in this type of story. I was like, yeah, okay, I get it. Yeah, that's fine. Cool. They do that. He finds the body. They bring it up. He does bury Nathaniel with Jeanette, but she keeps on. There's like an echoey voice in the house that's just like, "I'm never gonna forgive. I'm never gonna forgive." And you're like, "But you, all right,
but we did the thing."
Yeah, for real. Saying that even, but you know, and of course he's like, "Okay, so everything seems to be fine now," because everything kind of stops. The next day, he goes to the train station because he's meant to be going back to London. He's like, I want to get the fuck out of here. So he wants to leave right away. And the nanny and his son have come to meet him there. And he's like, okay, no, we're going to go right back to London. Like, can you just like go grab some tickets? Cool. He's speaking to Samuel. And of course, his son, Joseph, wanders onto the train tracks because supposedly the woman in black lures him onto the train tracks.
Because she's there. He sees her.
Because he sees her across and he starts climbing down. Arthur notices this at the last moment before the train arrives. And of course, they tried very, very vaguely to make it look like he saved him because he jumped onto the tracks, grabbed the kid.
I genuinely thought that he had, because I was like, oh, okay, like, yeah, it's fine. It's one of those movies, because it had been like so much that type of movie leading up to this. And then I was like, oh shit, they actually died.
Yeah, that's it. And because also like it seems like that for a moment where you're like, oh, did they try to like subvert expectations or whatever? He did save him or something, but then you're looking and Samuel and the nanny both look fucking horrified. And then that's it. After the train passes, or it seems like the train has just passed, Arthur seems to be standing there holding Joseph, and he's like, okay, no, we're okay. But then he's looking around. It's much darker. There's nobody around, and he can't see anyone. So then you kind of, and then turns around, there's a woman in a white dress standing a little further away, and Joseph goes, well, Daddy, who's that? And he looks and he sees that it's his wife, Arthur's wife, who passed away when she was giving birth to Joseph, and he's like, that's your mummy. And you're like, okay, so they're dead.
They're dead.
So you're like, okay. And then they do this weirdly happy thing where he goes over and they basically reunite and walk off together.
Yeah, and then it like flicks back to the woman in black, and like while the train is going past, Samuel is seeing all the children in the train, and he sees the woman in black as well. So it's like, so they're doing that, like, you know, thing like that they try and do in horror movies where they then zoom in on the woman in black and she like looks at the camera and then it goes black.
And you're like, bah, and then we cut to credits basically. But it was just, I was like, was the happy ending of this movie that him and the 4-year-old baby died? Damn.
I mean, like, it was a really, like, it was a good ending in a way.
I didn't hate it because I was like, well, that's nice that we didn't get like a very Hollywood ending.
Yeah, like it was nice in that way. But then at the same time, I thought the same thing that you did. I'm like, so are we trying to say that the woman in black did him a favor?
Yeah, like I don't know.
Is it because he reunited her with her son, so she's reuniting him and his son with their mother,
wife?
like his mother? Like, is that what we're supposed to read into here? I don't know, but
or was she just like, no, fuck you, it doesn't matter what you do, I'm still gonna kill all the kids.
Kill everyone? Like, I don't know. I don't know what the dealio is.
Especially because she didn't, like, because she didn't, how do I put this? Because she didn't stop doing things. Like, she still did this, and so she's still around. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, so is she just going to go back to killing everybody in the village? Like, I don't know.
Well, that's what I thought. I'm like, so we're still killing kids?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Are we going to take a break now for a while?
Well,
like,
supposedly
I'm not sure.
This movie has a sequel from like 2 years later. Which
that's right. I saw
haven't
that when
watched,
I was searching. It was like Women in Black 2. I'm like, oh, God.
Yeah, it's just, I know, and that might have sounded like that. I think we jumped back and forth a lot when we were talking about that. But honestly, like, it's just because it's quite boring and it doesn't give you the right kind of context at the right time. So it winds up being this weird mishmash of things that you're like, I don't know how to...
What am I supposed to do with this?
I don't know what I'm supposed to feel about this. Like, I'm not really sure. Like, I came away from it being like, okay.
That was a movie.
It was a movie.
It was a movie.
That was, there's like my, like, one sentence review. It was a movie.
Yeah, like the first scene was okay, the last scene was okay, but everything in between like was like meh.
And it all kind of blends together after a while. Like all the townspeople are the same. Everything else is the same.
And I couldn't tell you who the characters were in this movie, quite honestly.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of know anything about them. But yeah, it is what it is. However, aesthetically, obviously, and story-wise, yes, it is Gothic. And I'm sure that Susan Hill's novel is a lot more interesting.
Yes.
Than this movie was. I guarantee it's much more atmospheric because I've heard really good things about it from people. So I guarantee that it's much more atmospheric, much more interesting, and you feel much more immersed in the world and the story itself.
Absolutely.
So, unsurprisingly.
As is normally the case.
Yeah. So, have you guys seen The Woman in Black? Did you forget that it existed? Because we did until we were kind of like looking at options and ideas for movies to talk about this month. That's when we came across them. We were like, oh shit, that was a movie that was made.
That was a movie. See, once again, it was a movie.
It was a movie. Oh, man. So you can let us know about that over on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at FullyBookedCA. You can also check out our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/bookwaswaybetter. And if you're still here with us, which I hope you are, please feel free to leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening, because it really helps us get the episodes out in front of more people. But until next week, guys, keep on reading.
Thanks, everyone.